This is Radio VR. I'm Kels Hetherington in Washington. Joining us on the phone is Michael Bastasch. He is a reporter at the Daily Caller News Foundation in Washington, D.C. Michael covers business news and has written extensively about oil and natural gas. I've asked him on the program to discuss the possibility President Barack Obama is trying to depress the price of crude oil for two reasons. First, to punish Russia for its handling of Crimea, and two, to hurt Senate Republicans ahead of the midterm elections. Thanks for coming on the radio, Michael.
Thanks for having me on, Kels.
Well, President Barack Obama was just in Saudi Arabia meeting with King Abdullah. According to the White House, the meeting with the king was intended as a way for the two leaders to discuss security issues in the region, including nuclear negotiations with Iran and the Syrian civil war. But is it possible, or in fact even likely, the real reason for this meeting taking place was so that the U.S. could talk with Saudi Arabia about increasing oil production to undermine Russian finances?
I think that's very likely something that they talked about there. Of course, they're never going to say that publicly, but how could you not with the world's largest oil producer and head of an oil cartel, OPEC? I think it's very, very possible that they were talking about that, especially in light of the push here at home in the U.S. by Republican lawmakers to lift the ban on crude oil exports we have in the United States. This is kind of a way for President Obama to, get more crude out on the market to depress prices, but then not have to act against his environmental and liberal base here that kind of opposes more crude exports generally.
I think you're absolutely right about the need of the Obama administration to kind of slap down this effort by some on Capitol Hill to lift the ban that's been in place since 1973 on crude oil exports from the U.S. The Washington Times, though, is reporting, Michael, that if an economic standoff heats up between Russia and the United States, the U.S. could use its plentiful oil and natural gas resources to drive down prices of the oil and gas exports that provide a lifeline for Russia's economy. How exactly, in your opinion, might the U.S. affect that, Michael?
Yeah, well, by opening up the market, by lifting the ban to crude exports, we'd be putting out a lot more light crude on the market that our refiners really don't have the capacity to take. Our refineries are geared towards heavier crude that comes from places like Saudi Arabia, but we would put out lighter crude out onto the market. So I don't think it would hurt our refiners that much. And it would help bring down the price of oil and give countries, that do rely on Russian oil another outlet of maybe a more secure energy source so they don't have to deal with, Putin's regime. But that's really a long-term strategy. In the short term, besides getting Saudi Arabia to depress oil prices or maybe even lifting the ban, that would help put prices down a little bit. But I think in the long run, that's more of a long-run strategy. In the short run, I don't really think there is an option to really hurt Russia that badly. I think it just takes long-term strategizing and opening up of markets.
Yeah, opening up of markets is possible too. And when we think of this, we think of, what country might be able to be brought online as an oil and natural gas producer? And you think, well, maybe Iran. Could it be the Obama administration's real interest in negotiating with the Iranians to try to open up oil exports from Iran is to take the teeth out of the power over Europe that the Russians have with their natural gas exports?
Yeah, it could, but the problem is, I'm not sure how much natural gas Iran produces, but you'd just be if it was to get more Iranian natural gas to Europe, you'd kind of be trading one unsecure source for another. Because the whole point of the sanctions is to stop them from getting nuclear weapons, which they seem to be wanting to go ahead with regardless. I think it wouldn't be in the interest of Europe, but Obama may be considering it since it wouldn't hurt us necessarily, but I think it wouldn't be in the interest of our allies either.
Now, we need to remind our listeners here that most of the producers of oil in the United States are located in states which are represented by Senate Republicans, whereas most of the oil refineries are concentrated in states that are represented by Senate Democrats. So if the Obama administration was successfully able to lower the price of crude by putting more of it on the market, it would have a detrimental effect to those in Republican states who rely on sources of jobs that come from oil producers. Could that be going through the administration's head too, or is that too far afield?
I don't necessarily think that that's what they're thinking. I think the administration's plan actually is to lock up more resources than put more on the market, especially oil. With natural gas, they've been a little friendlier because of its lower carbon intensity, but it produces fewer carbon dioxide emissions. But I think that you also have, you do have Democrats who, especially on the ENR committee, who represent refining states. So Mary Landrieu in Louisiana, but also you have David Vitter who represents that state. And in Texas, both states went for Romney in the last election, and I think Texas alone has about almost a third of the U.S. refining capacity. So you have actually a lot of refining capacity in conservative areas. So I don't think it would hurt Republicans. I think it would be, the oil and gas industry wants to lift the export ban. So I think they see it as in their best interest to get their crude oil to new markets, because right now we have a glut, which is holding down the price of this light crude that we get from shale. Selling that abroad would help raise that price, but then hopefully depress, overall global prices.
Yeah, but the Democrats, and we can debate whether or not the refineries are more concentrated in Democratic states, but that's what I've heard. So, and I know that producers would like to export crude oil, which is not currently permitted, or only in very unusual circumstances. But if the price of crude were to go down and the export ban continued to be in place, oil refineries would have a day in the sun, right? Because their profits would go sky high. They'd be buying crude that was trapped in the United States because of this prohibition on exports at a discount, substantial discount.
Yeah, it would, but I think that we have to understand that there's a mismatch between our refining capacity in the United States and the kind of oil we produce. We mostly produce the light crude from the shale regions that our refineries aren't really geared to refine. So we have a technological limit of what we can refine. So I think in the long run, it hurts. It definitely hurts the oil and gas industry, but the refiners are going to have to make huge investments to switch over their refineries. When if we had a we lifted the ban on exports, we could just ship that crude out to refineries overseas, which now lawmakers would not want to do, I think, because they are generally interested in keeping economic activity in the U.S. But the refiners could then just focus on refining crude that is heavier, and in the end we have comparative advantage, and I think we're going to be producing way more oil and gas and depressing the price even further.
Let me turn the conversation in this direction. Is it possible that what Barack Obama is trying to do is take the fire out of the belly of the energy boom that is transforming America right now, and basically stopping the green energy revolution, which the Democrats have hoped for so long, from really coming to fruition, because it's so cheap to purchase these fossil fuels now that it makes it that much more difficult to to push reasonably and economically for a green solution. So the Obama people want to push down the price of oil so dramatically that a lot of the producers say, you know what, at that price, it's not worth making. Is that part of the strategy here?
It could be. I think really what the strategy is to, and this kind of does get at that a little bit, but part of the strategy in part by environmental groups and a lot of the bureaucrats who have been kind of captured by this environmental ideology, they're not focused on stopping it at the point of extraction. I think they've realized they can't do that because it's mostly on state and federal lands. So I think they're mostly focused on stopping the transportation of it and also the export of it. So I think, which would mean that the price gets eventually, you just get this huge glut of oil that would make kind of oil uneconomical to drill after a while, and maybe shift them into some other energy resource that could be renewables. But I think that probably is part of the calculus.
Another side effect of the ban on exporting crude and the limitations and all the paperwork that's required to export natural gas is that a lot more coal is being exported from the United States. And the liberals continue to say, well, look at these other countries, they pollute so much. Well, really, it is the United States exporting this pollution by way of this ban remaining in place. Are you seeing and hearing the same thing?
I think most countries aren't getting their power from oil. So, for example, they're not getting their electricity, or they're not heating their homes with oil. That's done with coal and gas. So I don't think lifting the export ban on on oil would affect coal. That's mainly for power plants, and that's mainly because the cost of electricity has gotten so high in Europe, and they've banned nuclear, that they need coal is the only cheap resource for them to go to.
In our final moments here, Michael, tell me, where is Obama making the biggest mistakes in his energy policy? Maybe that's not a short conversation. It could probably go on for the rest of the hour, but help us understand that.
I think the biggest mistake he is making in his energy policy doesn't actually have to do with oil and natural gas, because he can't really do much about that. I think the biggest mistake in his energy policy is instituting his de facto ban on coal, which he's done through the new EPA greenhouse gas emissions limits. That is going to raise the price of electricity. That is going to make it so our grid is less secure in the future. And I think that's something that we have to grapple with in the future. That's going to be a much more dangerous enemy than Iran or Russia or anything, because that's, the economy is, the base of our economy is cheap, affordable energy and reliable energy that you can count on. And I think he's imperiled that a lot with overregulation.
Well, Michael, explain for me, how does the Obama energy policy to date make it more likely that you would have an attack on the American energy grid?
I don't actually think you would be more likely to. I think a lot of the attacks on the energy grid have been overblown by a few people to benefit themselves. I think that the grid is overall, I think, pretty safe, and there are security concerns. I know there was an attack in California that did take out a lot. We didn't lose power, though, I don't think. I don't think Obama specifically has done anything that would make the grid any less safe. I think what I'm talking about is not the physical security, but the actual reliability of the grid to meet peak demand, or to give power, to provide power to people when, we get really cold weather again.
Well, there certainly is a lot of fighting between the states and the feds over jurisdiction. Who's going to set the rates? So a lot of these interstate power lines are not getting built. And that is making it very difficult for people in New York or Washington, D.C., which gets most of its power from out far, far away from Washington, D.C., where we are, through these big power lines that are not getting built. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think actually that's part of it too, and that's the infrastructure side. I think that you have lots of federal lands issues that they won't let you build transmission lines across federal lands or pipelines. I think pipelines are the biggest one. Natural gas is, like in the Northeast, for example, we had our pipeline systems were overworked and couldn't get enough gas to the Northeast this last winter when temperatures were at record lows. Snowstorms. I mean, I can't even count how many snowstorms hit D.C. It seemed like it was one every other day. And you had a situation where there wasn't enough natural gas getting up there. Despite, huge levels of production, natural gas is useless if you can't pipe it places or you can't get it to where it needs to be. And what happened in the Northeast is they had to start burning more oil and turning on coal plants. I mean, they were burning oil for power. Come on. It shouldn't have to be happening. That is part of it, and that's part of the feds and the environmentalists teaming up to stop these projects from going through. But what I'm talking about specifically is the shutting down of coal plants in areas that rely overly on coal. I mean, rely a lot on coal. So you have areas of the South and the Midwest that get most of their power from coal and aren't really able to build. These coal plants don't really have any good replacement, and they're being replaced with renewable energy, which is less reliable. It's not a baseload power.
All right, Michael, I've got to leave it there, but I really appreciate your coming on the radio and giving us these insights.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Always good to talk with you. All right, that was Michael Bastasch, a reporter at the Daily Caller News Foundation in Washington, D.C., where he focuses on energy issues. I'm Kels Hetherington in Washington for Radio VR.